Welcome to my PowerPoint presentation about chests in Dead by Daylight. This video is inspired by Seriously Casual's video, Why Chests in Dead by Daylight Feel So Outdated. Chests are secondary objectives for survivors to interact with. Chests take 8 seconds to be opened and provide the survivor with a random item to improve their chance of survival. Normally, 3 chests spawn per trial, one of which is always in the basement, but certain loadout items can alter this number. Chests are arguably one of the most obsolete features in modern Dead by Daylight. While it does sound good on paper to obtain an item, chests have a number of factors that make them exceptionally weak. Broadly, chests are simply time inefficient. The time you spend on opening a chest is more likely than not to have been a waste of time. For example, if you open the chest and get a brown toolbox, you've wasted more time opening that chest than you would have earned by using that toolbox on a generator. For other items like keys, maps, fog vials, or even flashlights, they're unlikely to buy you a significant time in chase, with the only exception being a flashlight save. Usually the only item worthwhile is a medkit so that you may self-heal, as a health state is an investment with a good payout in most situations. With that in mind, the random nature further worsens the value of chests. Not only must you gamble that you'll get the right kind of item, you're also gambling on the rarity of that item, with most lower rarity items being outright worse with few exceptions. All that in mind, it's still a free item, right? Well, there's still a better option in the loadout system. When you bring an item into a match, you can bring exactly the item you want, and you can also bring 2 add-ons to further enhance the strength of that item. It can also be used in coordination with perks to create a strong synergy that would otherwise fail if not for the keystone item. For example, Champion of Light is entirely dependent on a flashlight and offers no means on its own to acquire one, meaning that equipping a flashlight in your loadout is essential to ensure your perk won't be a dead perk slot. Furthermore, the loadout system has only grown stronger in recent years. Previously, the blood web was more expensive and blood points were harder to earn, so the loadout system was, to a degree, tempered by the expense of losing items. However, items have been made cheaper and blood points can be earned like candy nowadays. Additionally, the prestige system reworked to reduce the grind for teachable perks has consequently funneled more blood points into other categories, including items and their add-ons. Overall, there's really no reason for survivors to go into a trial empty-handed other than for the challenge. Seriously Casual makes 3 recommendations in order to adjust the balance of items in order to make chests more viable. The first recommendation is to buff chests so that items can spawn in with add-ons. This is probably the most straightforward change you can make with the smallest impact of the 3 recommendations. This makes chests more worthwhile, as add-ons can mitigate the inefficiency of chests by increasing an item's action speeds or enhancing their chase potential. Survivors may be more enticed to go into a trial empty-handed as they have less need to bring in an item. The trade-off to this, however, is that killers will be facing more and stronger items on average. That being said though, these changes don't affect the loadout system at all. Survivors can still just as easily acquire and equip whatever items they want through the blood web. Opening these buff chests still leaves a lot up to chance, so I can't really see this change necessarily making the killer experience worse, nor would it alter the survivor experience much either. The second recommendation made by Seriously Casual is to have loadout items start the match with half their charges. This is an interesting idea, but it's not without its own issues. It would certainly make chests more desirable, as they would contain full charge items. It would also balance items by making loadouts weaker and requiring a perk slot to bring the item to its full potential. Of course, this is a blanket nerf to survivors and to one of the strongest parts of their kits, meaning that it will have a far more significant impact to gameplay than the add-on buff mentioned previously. Additionally, certain items will be dramatically worsened than others. For example, a medkit can only provide 1 self-heal, which is usually the main reason you bring in a medkit. With this system, you'd have to bring in charge add-ons in order to make it stretch to 1 self-heal. The other issue is that this does not address the innate problems with chests. The random nature of chests is what I would argue to be the weakest part of the chest system. Nerfing the loadout system in this way will be a large nerf to survivors, and no number of chest buffs could really make up for that. The third recommendation made by Seriously Casual is for loadout items to spawn in chests, with the first chest that a survivor opens containing their item. This completely eliminates the competition between chests and the loadout system, as they become one and the same. It can also provide some warm-up period to killers in the beginning of the game as survivors search for their items, which is something that has been requested by some folks in the community for a long time. However, I'm still not convinced by this recommendation either. For one, it doesn't really make chests better, but rather just makes it one additional step for survivors. There won't be much need to interact with the chest more than once per match, and this would simultaneously reduce the ability for a chest to create a wicked turnaround, such as the last survivor retrieving a key from the chest to open the hatch, as most, if not all chests, would be opened by the mid-game. Additionally, there are a lot of complications that arise from this change. The first chase of the match is usually the most important, and an item like a flashlight can be used to make that chase last longer. There's not really a good comparison, but I would liken it to your killer's power not being at full strength until you break a few pallets or something. Generally, survivors start the match strong and the killer starts weak, and those positions swap as the match progresses. Any nerfs to the survivor early game could have some significant downstream impacts compared to where the game currently stands. Then there's the spawn logic. Because chests generally spawn far apart, there's usually only going to be one survivor who can quickly retrieve their item, while the remaining survivors have to move into mid-map to find a chest of their own, and one survivor will always have to enter the basement. While I definitely see the vision in creating this treasure hunt spread across 4 survivors, I think the novelty would wear off very fast. This also creates something of a reverse rubber banding effect. If the killer exerts good pressure, there may not be time to search a chest, whereas lower performing killers will offer survivors better opportunity to find their items. Subsequently, higher performing killer players will suffer less throughout a match, whereas lower performing killers will have to endure more items. As with many balance changes in this game, it would widen the gap between killers, but somewhat uniquely between players too. Lastly, absent any other changes, there are simply not enough chests in the match. Naturally, only 3 spawn, so you would have to increase it to 4 if all 4 survivors bring an item. That said though, I would have some concerns with scratched and cut point offerings. Removing up to 2 chests would consequently remove 2 items in the match and would be a massive hit to survivors. You could increase the minimum chest spawn up to 6 to ensure all survivors can claim their items, but then that would be essentially manufacturing a problem to sell a solution. This recommendation sounds good on paper, but I think a lot of things may slip through the cracks here. With those recommendations in mind, I present to you the theft system. Now this is actually very similar to the third recommendation made by Seriously Casual, but I think I've smoothed out a lot of the kinks that the idea had. Survivors spawn into the trial with their items as usual. However, any items left on the ground can be stolen by the killer. This can be done by performing a short snuff animation as you would with a boon totem, and then the entity takes the item and transports it into a random chest on the map, transforming it into a cache chest. The last survivor to hold the stolen item can see the aura of the cache chest holding it for a brief period, allowing them to retrieve their stolen item. Cache chests are visually unique, enabling survivors to identify them so they can choose to steal a good item from a teammate or leave them for them to retrieve. I don't know what the visual marker would be, but taking the lazy inspiration from apocalyptic ingenuity, we could slap a big white X on it. When a cache chest is opened, it presents its item with the same add-ons and charges it had when it was stolen. Additionally, a cache chest can be rummaged through once per trial by default, enabling survivors to still utilize them like normal chests. The targeting system for cache chests is that it prioritizes already open chests, closing them and inserting the item. If no chests have been opened, it transforms a closed chest, replacing the original item with the stolen item. When no normal chests remain, any items on the ground cannot be stolen. With this system, there are a few changes. I would increase chest spawns to 4 per trial, just so under normal conditions, the killer can steal every item if each survivor brings 1. Additionally, I would also implement some chest buffs as suggested by Seriously Casual. Namely, I'd allow items to occasionally spawn with some lower tier add-ons and even more rarely with the second. I think the rarity and spawn chances are pretty conservative here, but I'd also implement what I would call dependency clusters. All this means is that the game checks the item and previous add-ons it's already rolled before rolling the next add-on and giving better odds to add-ons that would synergize with the item as it is. For example, if you were to open a chest and receive an Alex's toolbox, the game would recognize that it gave you a sabotage toolbox and increase the chances that any add-ons it has would be sabotage related. This would reduce the randomness that normal chests have and increase its competitiveness with the loadout system. Lastly, as a means to enforce the theft system, I would consider a base kit way to force survivors to drop their items. I feel having them drop on being hooked would be the least intrusive way to do it. However, we could also try perk overhauls or add-on passes for every killer. For example, we could take Dredge and give him an add-on where a survivor drops their item when they enter the Remnant, or within certain range of him exiting a logger well in Nightfall. This could help shake things up before committing fully to a base kit change. Overall, these changes can make chests more present in the match and grant killers an additional means of pressure in the match without a blanket nerf to the survivor early game. It would also improve a number of perks such as Hoarder or Human Greed without any direct changes. Thanks for watching, leave a like and put your thoughts in the comments below.